And we are live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am super excited to have Annie England Noblin on
Yes.
the. Yes, I practiced that all morning, Annie, and then I almost stepped over myself after. So anyway, um, Annie is here to talk all about fun, romantic, holiday season books, and she's got a brand new book that today is release day for, and it's Christmas at Corgi Cove. And what a fun book this is, Annie. Your publisher was so kind to send over an advanced review copy, and Gollum is reading it at the moment on my shelf over here, and what a fun book. I love this book, and it was just so much fun. Gave me such warm holiday vibes, and so I just wanted to start by telling you how much I love the book.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Um, I like to start each show with a fun question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Probably when I was about 8, and my grandparents bought me a journal for my birthday
Okay.
because I really liked to write. And they thought, let's get this
Yeah.
kid a journal. And I proceeded to write terrible poetry in it, just rhyming poetry where, I had to pick words that rhymed with each other. And sometimes they were
Yeah.
non words. And I think that was the first time I thought, ooh, I like this. I want to keep doing this.
Love it. So from 8 years old, did you, after getting that journal and having a place to write down your thoughts, did you kind of consider yourself like, okay, now I'm an official writer now? And did those were
No,
you that kid that gonna?
I feel like I'm like most writers. We struggle to call ourselves writers. Even now saying I'm an author feels weird.
Right.
But it's the only thing I've ever wanted to do. It's the only thing I feel like I've ever even been remotely good at.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just what I love to do.
So, am I correct? This is your eighth book that you have
Yes,
published.
it is.
That That's amazing. I was just looking over your Amazon page, and you definitely seem to have an affinity for pets, for
Yes.
dogs especially. What do you think it is about dogs and pets that are a catalyst for good stories?
I just think for so many of us, if you have a pet, you probably understand that they are so important in your life.
Yeah,
And definitely for me, I got my first adult pet
yeah,
when I was in my mid 20s. And that dog, I feel like saved my life. She moved with me, 10 different times. And every time I'd get a new job or have to pack up, she was with me. And she was just the constant. And I feel like all of my other pets are that way, as well as I get older. They're there for me. And I feel like most characters need that. At least in
yeah,
my books, they do.
yeah. Um, Annie, what was the going from that kid who got the journal from your grandparents, and those were amazing grandparents, by the way, to then kind of going through the journey that most of us do. I feel like I have the storytelling gene, but I also need to pay bills and
Yes.
need to figure out what I'm going to do in the world while I pursue my dream, or just establish myself and then come back to my dream. What was it that kind of brought you back around to writing?
I was a new mom. My son was less than 2 when I started writing my first novel. I was at a new job. I was a relatively newly married person. Everything in my life was sort of in
Yeah.
flux. And I needed a place that I could control that was just mine. And I'd had this idea for a story for a few years, probably 5. And I thought, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to write this book, even if nobody reads it. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And it just sort of came out of the chaos of my life. And I thought, I just have to have a place that I can control that is just mine. And that's what I ended up doing.
I started writing my first book when I had small kids, um, but there seems to be something about parenthood that triggers some, and it's not that way for everyone. Um, because there are plenty of people who are single, or who don't have children, or don't yet have children, or that there are plenty of those people, but there does seem to be a trigger of some sort that this little person's around, and it unlocks all sorts of I don't know if it's hormonal or what it is, but there does seem to be a connection.
I think so. Especially when you have it in your with your first child, I guess, especially maybe you lose a piece of your identity. Your
Mm,
everyday everything is tied up in this child, as it should be.
yeah,
But maybe we go searching for something that is ours again, and
right.
maybe writing is one of those things. I don't know, but you're right.
Yeah, I don't have an answer either, but it does seem to there seems to be a connection. So you had this story idea, you had a new baby, a new job, new marriage, everything's in flux. Did you finish that story idea?
I did. That
Okay,
is what became my first book, Sit, Stay, Speak. Um,
okay,
I started writing that book in 2012, and it was published in 2015.
gotcha. Were when you first started writing that book, did you have a sense of genre, of story structure? Did you have an idea and say, this is the kind of book that I want to write? And I ask that because I know for me especially, and a lot of other people I've talked to, you a lot of times in the beginning you don't really understand where your story is going to fit. You just kind of tell the story that's coming out of you, and then the rest of that, you kind of shape it up later, or whatever. did
Yes,
did you have an idea about all of that part of it?
I knew nothing. I just thought I want to write this book. I knew it was going to be women's fiction. I knew that, but I didn't really know anything else. I just knew that I wanted to get this story out there, and then I remember thinking once it's done, I'll know what it is.
Mm, yeah,
So, that's kind of how I looked at it, especially in the beginning.
yeah. How long did it take you to write that first book?
About, I think probably 7 months for the first draft. And then I had to, of course, went in and did the editing. And it took several edits and rewrites before a publisher picked it up. But the first draft, probably 6 to 7 months.
Okay. Um, it's fascinating that your first book that you wrote is the first book that you published, because a lot of people have books that they write it doesn't work for whatever reason, or it doesn't fit the market at the time, or whatever the reason is, but it doesn't sell, and you scrap that book or put it in a desk drawer or a trunk and start over with something else. And then other people finish this book, and it may not be publishable at the time, but like you said, you go through rewrites and redrafts, and it eventually becomes the thing that goes to market. Do you have any sense of what that difference is? What makes a book, um, what makes a writer give up on a project, or at least shelve it, go to another one, versus like you did, keep working on the book until it becomes the book that it needs to be?
I I'm not sure. I think for me, at the time, I just had this one story I wanted to tell, and I didn't have all of the ideas floating through my head for new stories at first. That
Yeah.
came a little bit later. Now I feel like I have 8,000 stories in my head, but I think for me, I had this one story, and so it was easy for me to focus on it because I didn't have all of these other projects out here that I wanted to work on. I just had this one thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to finish, that I wanted to stick with. And so for me, I think that's probably why.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So did you landed an agent during this process? What was that? What was the process of, okay, I have a finished book, now what do I do with it?
I I went out and bought the 2013 Guide to Literary Agents. I don't think they make that anymore, but it was like
I haven't
the
seen it in a
Bible.
while, but yeah, it was
I
a big honking book.
Yes, and I so I spent, I would write, and then at night after I got my son to sleep, I would read as much as I could about the industry, about literary agents, about querying. And so I bought this guide to literary agents, and I bought a pack of highlighters. And I went through and highlighted. I had a system. So like pink were the agents that I thought would be the most likely to be interested. And I just kind of went down the line and I did the pinks first. And once I got all the rejections from the pink, I moved to the, orange and got, I probably had 100 rejections before I got
Yeah.
that one yes. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, they get 2 or 3 rejections and they're like, oh, maybe I need to write another book, or I just plowed through because I thought, well, the worst anybody can say is no.
Right.
And I got the one yes, and that was all I needed.
Yeah. What were some of the conversations like with your new husband when you start writing a book and then, start trying to break into the industry?
He has always been so supportive. When we first met, I told him, I have a master's degree in creative writing, so I'm weird. And he knew that I was a writer. Before I wrote my first novel, I wrote a lot of short story, like nonfiction short stories, and a
Yeah.
lot of poetry. And so he knew that I like to write. I think at first he looked at it as this fun little hobby,
Yeah.
this project I was working on that kind of gave me my own thing. And then it became something else. And I think he was probably as surprised as I was that it actually worked and that we're here.
Yeah. So after you published that first book, um, when in this process do you start thinking about repeating the process and going through this again?
I started once I got my literary agent, and I think I did one rewrite after that. Before we started sending it out to publishers, I started writing another book pretty much right after that. I had to put it on hold a couple times because I think I did at least 2 more rewrites on Sit, Stay, Speak. Um, but in the meantime, I had this book sort of on the back burner that I was working on. And when Sit, Stay, Speak came out in 2015, I already had my second book finished because it was what, a year for that
Yeah.
process. And so I had I won't say a lot of time on my hands, but I had the time to think of a new idea and to begin that process.
At what point, we talked about earlier the in writing that first book and not really understanding or caring about genre and where things are going to fit on the shelves in the bookstore and all the stuff that comes later. When did you start kind of realizing, okay, this is the kind of genre author that I am? This is the spot where readers kind of expect me, and did that start having an effect on your life and your career as a writer and the kind of storyteller that you are? That, like, when does that start to kind of become a factor?
Probably after that first book came out, and I realized that people really enjoyed the animal aspect of my book. And there was a lot of commentary on that relationship between the main character and the I say the main character dog because he is a big part of the first book. And I
Yeah.
realized really quickly that I wanted to continue that momentum. And that was easy for me because I have pets and I worked in animal rescue for years and years. So it's really easy for me to incorporate animals in my books because I don't know how to live without a pet. But I think definitely after that first book, and I thought, oh, okay, this is something I can work with. I can do this. I can be the dog lady. This will
Yeah.
work.
Oh man. So your second book, you said you kind of immediately started following that up. What was the second book that you wrote and published?
Just fine with Caroline.
Gotcha. And you have written the the Sisters Hemingway. That one is a bit of a departure from your other books,
A little bit. It's got 3 main character point of views, which is something I had never done before. I
right?
like I like to do things that are a little bit different with each book, sort of challenge myself to do something that I haven't done. And so I had the 3 main character point of views, and then the animals in that book aren't really as prominent. They're there, but they don't take up as much of the story as the previous animals, in the other books did.
Right.
So it was a lot different.
Yeah. What was it fun to kind of stretch those muscles, if you will, that and kind of break out of the I don't want to use the word formula because that's not what I mean, but you know what I'm
Yeah,
getting
I
at.
mean, it
Like
kind
there's
of
a
is.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I felt it felt fun because I had all of these three different point of views, and I could sort of weave the story through all three of them, so it didn't get, I don't know if boring is the right word, but when you're reading a book and
yeah,
that this scene is just the vehicle to get to the important bits. And I felt
right,
like I didn't have to do that as much, that there was, I had these three main points of view, and they just sort of moved the story for me, which,
right,
which was really fun.
yeah. Last Christmas you published Christmas in Blue Dog Valley, and then we've got the new book now, Christmas at Corgi Cove. Was this a conscious shift that you wanted to write some of these seasonal books, and what did it bring to your creative life to kind of have this motif to kind of work off of?
It was really wasn't intentional. I think I came up with the titles and just really wanted to use them.
Yeah,
But the book that came out before Christmas at Blue Dog Valley was is called Maps for the Getaway, and it is also a little bit of a departure because it's a road trip movie. It has three or movie book road trip book
yeah,
has has three main points of view. But the friends in that book are dealing with the death of a friend,
mm,
and I lost my best friend in 2016 to cancer. And so
mm,
that book was really important to me to write, but it was really hard.
yeah,
And so Christmas at Blue Dog Valley was intentional in that it was a departure from that, but I
yeah,
felt like heaviness, and I could do something fun and light, that maybe didn't have so much trauma,
yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit, and Christmas at Corgi Cove is kind of the same way. They're just, they've been such a joy to write.
Yeah.
And I needed that.
I had a similar experience where I had written a story that was very emotionally draining, and I needed just a palate cleanser, for
Yes.
lack of a better word. And that became the thing that I wrote then, when I just didn't have any expectations on it and just kind of let it be what it was going to be, was like my most well received story, the one that I didn't overthink going into it. And and of course you then want to follow up that, well, I'm just going to write everything without putting any thought in. No,
Right.
that's not what I'm saying. But there is something to be said for just switching gears and just kind of letting the magic happen.
It's nice. And like you said, sometimes you need a palate cleanse. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting what resonates with people and what they love. And it can be really surprising.
Right. Right. So what was it about the Christmas Story? What kind of caught your attention there, or made you want to pursue that?
I love Christmas stories. I like to read them. I am that basic white girl who likes Hallmark movies. And I like to write what I like to read.
Yeah.
And I wrote my first Christmas book it came out in 2017, called Cupcakes. And that was so fun. And I really enjoyed
Yeah.
it. And I thought, why didn't it's been like 3 books, 4 books. Why haven't I gone back to that? So I just thought, I want to do something Christmassy. And luckily my editor was open to that. Um, and it just sounded fun. So I did it.
Yeah. Well, and there's something fun about a holiday themed book. Um, you just kind of instantly tap into emotions, and there's a stream already flowing, and you just get to
Yes.
tap into it.
Yes.
It's hard to describe, but you kind of go into it with bases loaded, in a lot of
Yeah, it's like a
ways. Like,
preset.
yes,
You know what you've got, and if you want, you can start with, you got Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you can just hit all of and it makes it a little bit easier when you already have
right,
those things in place.
right. Um, what the one thing that I'm the most fascinated with when I talk to authors is where stories begin. And I don't mean in the trite sense of where do you get your ideas from, because story ideas are everywhere. But there's something about that idea that just floats higher than the rest, or maybe you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, this gives me a certain feeling, and then you want to pursue that, with a new story. Or maybe you're watching a news article or something and you start playing the what if game, and then all of a sudden you start kind of casting this what if game with characters, and then you're like, well, who is she, and where'd she come from, and then all of a sudden the wheels start spinning, and then in one moment a book like Christmas at Corgi Cove does not exist in any form or fashion. But then whatever the catalyst is that kicks off, and you start pursuing this in your mind, and then the book does exist, and it's your job as the author to kind of dig it up and dust it off and excavate it, and then rewrite and polish and all that kind of stuff. So, what is the moment of creation like for you?
Usually, uh, you mean when the idea first comes, or when I first
Yeah,
start?
like what is the thing that kicks off that it doesn't exist at all, and then in some strange fashion it does exist, and then you as the author start figuring it out.
A lot of times it will be when I am going to bed at night
Yeah.
and I'm trying to turn my brain off, but I can't because that's who I am as a person. And I start thinking about these characters or the scene or something that like you said, that I've watched or that I've read. And I thought, oh, that would make a good story. Or I want to steal this element, right, of this story or the story I heard or this character. And I think, how can I make this something that will work? And I know I've got something good when I go to bed thinking about it at night for several nights in a row. And then I'm like, okay, this is going to be a story because I'm continually thinking about it. Because there are tons of ideas that come in and out, but the ones that stick are the ones that I try to use to create.
Yeah. Tell me about the character of Rosie Reynolds.
So Rosie is, well, she's a transplant in this small Texas town, but she's been there for a while, and she's found that even though you get the sense at first that she doesn't really want to be there as a younger teenager, but 10 years later she is like fully in, right, to this
Yeah.
little Texas town, helping her aunt and uncle run this bed and breakfast, and she loves it. And for Rosie, the most important thing in her life are her aunt and uncle and this little bed and breakfast called Corgi Cove. It is really the center of her universe, and she is terrified that she's going to lose that because, especially at the beginning for Rosie, she doesn't really know who she is, right? Without this life that she's built, what does the rest of her life look like? And so that's really who Rosie is, just somebody who's very into this little universe that she's created for herself.
Yeah. What is it that's so fun about corgis?
They're so cute. I don't own a corgi. I'm a bulldog and pug lady. Um,
Gotcha.
but I have lots of friends who have corgis, and their little personalities are just, they're so special, and they have, you know, they're in charge, right? They'll tell you when they don't like something. They decide who they like and who they don't like, and they're just so cute. And my 12-year-old loves corgis. Always wanted a corgi. So maybe someday. But he would have pictures of corgis or would talk about cute corgis he saw on the internet. And for some reason, the corgi just sort of stuck right in my brain.
Gotcha.
Plus, I like alliteration. So Christmas at Corgi Cove is just, it works.
Right. Writes itself.
Right.
Writes itself. So we've got Rosie who has built this idyllic life, but we wouldn't have a story without some conflict. How did you, dream in your masochistic brain, horrible things to do to Rosie?
Well, I live in a small town in the Missouri Ozarks, and there a lot of these little towns, especially across the United States, the little resort towns, sometimes they have these bigger corporations come in, right?
Yeah.
Buy up the land and build hotels. And I've seen that happen, where I live and in other areas. And I thought, well, that would be something.
Yeah.
If poor Rosie's, family is getting ready to lose their bed and breakfast to this big corporation, because how do you stop that, right? In real life, you
Right.
you don't usually. But when it comes to a book, anything is possible. And I wanted to have that conflict, because I thought that would make for a good character, because she's going to have to figure out who she is
Yeah.
without perhaps all of these things that she has built her life around.
Yeah. Um, I live near the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and about 20 or 30 years ago, the casino industry moved in, and a lot of our coastline was transformed from what it used to be to what it is now. And, good, bad, or indifferent, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but there's lots of story fodder there, and the big corporations coming
Oh
in,
yeah.
and and that's something that everyone can relate to in one way or another. I think no matter where you live in the country, you've seen this pattern of behavior. So that was ripe for telling a gripping story at for sure. Um, we wouldn't have a great conflict in a rom com of sorts if we didn't have tension with a person that brings conflicted um, emotions too. So what? Tell me about the foil that you dreamt up.
I love an enemies to lovers trope. It is my favorite.
Yeah.
And Rosie is sort of at a place in her life where she's not really thinking about that, right? She's not thrilled with this guy who's come in to try to buy the cove. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if the two of them, they don't like each other, of course, at first. But as they get to know more about each other, and as their situation becomes more complicated, right? Because it always does, has to
Yeah.
get more complicated. They start to figure out, maybe we don't hate each other like we thought we did. And I also like the idea of a big city guy coming into a small town, because so often we see the big city girl, right? She comes in, she
Right.
meets the small town guy, and then she gives up her life in the big city for the guy. And I kind of
I've seen
wanted
that
to,
Hallmark movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of them, every single one to
Right.
exist. So I thought, it might be, and I've written that book, right? So I thought, well,
Yeah.
maybe it would be fun if it's the big city guy who comes in instead of the big city girl. And this was my first time writing a book where I used like the male, main character, his point of view.
Right.
So that was really fun for me because I'd never done that before.
Gotcha. Um, Annie, did I hear that you have struggled with rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes.
I also have dealt with rheumatoid arthritis, and there are days where your hands just hurt, your knuckles swell, your fingers don't want to move like you want them to, and it's you know it hasn't been debilitating, but it's frustrating, I think
Yes.
is a good descriptor. How have you dealt with it, and do you feel like having a condition that can affect the thing that you love to do the most? How do you work through that, and has it affected your creative life?
So I started writing Christmas at Corgi Cove right after I was diagnosed, and right around the time I was, fighting my insurance company for medication approval. So I was basically in a flare where my hands
Yeah,
hurt. Of course, it centers in my hands. Of
of
course,
course, of course.
and it made it really hard because it can make you really tired,
Yeah,
and then you're in all this pain, and you're trying to type on a computer when you can barely move your fingers.
yeah,
And that was really difficult because I already had to give up so many things because there are just some things I couldn't do, especially before I, got the medication I have now. And I worried a little bit. What if I can't do it, or what if I can do it, but I can't do it in the timeline that I need to do it, because I might have a week or two where I just can't write.
yeah,
Um, And I don't even, I mean, I just did it. You do it because you have to, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to get through this book. I'm going to get through this book. I'm going to do it, even if it kills me. That's what I did. I took a lot of ibuprofen,
Yeah.
which didn't do a lot. And I tried to find the most comfortable place I could, and I did it for as long as I could. And then I would, stop. And I tried to be kind to myself and my body in the process, and not, well, maybe I could sit and write for 4 hours at a time last year, but I can't do that now. So I'm going to do what I can do when I can do it. And that helped, just allowing myself that, courtesy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we are so glad that you were able to get through that to now we have Christmas at Corky Cove that's available everywhere today. Annie, I know that, if we understand how the publishing industry works, this book has probably been off your desk for a while now. What are you working on these days?
I just finished my ninth novel. It's called Spring Fling, so not a Christmas book. And so that now is on to my editor, and I'm just sort of awaiting, her notes after she gets through it. And then I have another little kernel of an idea for a book,
Love it.
which is a Christmas book. So I'm going to see if they'll let me write another Christmas book here pretty soon, because I don't know, maybe that's just my thing. I love it. So that's
Well,
what I'm hoping to work on next.
Well, Christmas at Corky Cove, you definitely can tell that this is coming from a place of love. We're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode. If you don't have a great local bookstore to go visit and support local bookstores. But if you don't have one, we're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode. Have you gotten a chance to listen to the audiobook yet, Annie?
I am actually listening to it right now. It's the way I listen to it because it's easier to listen to than read.
Yeah.
I don't like to read my own stuff. So
Can
I'm,
be a
yeah, I'm
little
listening to it
painful.
right now, because that's how I find if there are any errors, anything that we missed, I'll hear it, so we can
Yeah.
fix it. So I'm listening to it right now.
Love it. Well, like I said, we're going to put links to it in the show notes. Go grab Christmas at Corky Cove today. Annie, if people are just discovering you and you want to follow along the journey and dig into your back catalog and all that good stuff, is there a place online where they can connect with you and get all the info?
Oh yeah, so my Facebook is Annie England Noblin, and that's where I post a lot of updates or release stuff. I also have a TikTok, Annie Noblin Writes, and that's where you get, I guess, more of the real me, the weird me. So if I post there quite a bit. So those are probably the best two places.
Great. We'll link those up in the show notes as well to make it easier for folks to find you. Christmas at Corky Cove, available everywhere today. Go grab your copy. Annie, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.